Welcome, comrades. My name is Pusiso Xaba, the National Chairperson of the PAC. I will be facilitating, or rather introducing the speaker today. Today we have Comrade Lunga Mantashe, who's the Deputy President of the PAC, an academic. He would like me to call him Comrade Mantashe. Actually, he's Dr. Lunga Mantashe. He's a comrade who has come up the ranks of the PAC, has done a lot of work around youth structures, student structures, and we felt that he was most appropriate to handle the topic of today, which is about the role of the youth and the role of students in the revolution, and we will then take it from there. But before he comes in, Chairperson, I will prefer that you don't have your camera on. Let's then give an opportunity to you to just have a word before we then give to the Deputy President of the PAC an opportunity to then lead us in the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Africa, and other leaders who are here today. And thanks a lot to our guest, Lunga Mantashe, for being present here to capacitate us as the youth of Swaziland. Because we are still hoping that we must reach the struggle forward, the struggle for socialism and the struggle for democracy. We believe sibonile emuva la ama-political school noma sesiwaqala phinze this year after the youth have demanded ukuthi bacela lokho ukuthi sebacela ukuthi vele asaqala lama-political school sizokhona lokho ukuthi kuchubeke lama-discussion sibonile idlala i-role lenhle kakhulu. Sibonga kakhulu for international solidarity from the PAC for supporting us kumsabalazo lesibhekene nawo. Sibonga kakhulu, comrades. Thank you so much, leadership.
Thank you very much, DP. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure whether you would prefer me with the video on, or I could proceed as I am invisible.
It's your preference, DP.
Okay. I prefer to be invisible for quite some time, and maybe I may be visible at some other point. Chair, I want to begin by thanking you and thanking the Chair of the Youth for inviting me into this platform to share thoughts on the question of the role of students in the revolution. I was touched by one of the concepts that the Chair of the Youth and that was the concept of the importance of theory, of understanding the relationship between theory and practice. It was the struggle that had ensued in Swaziland after the attainment of the independence in 1968, the struggle that began 5 years later of banning political parties was itself begging this understanding of the relationship between theory and practice, how the banning of these political parties themselves is linked to an ideological superstructure that currently holds power in Swaziland in the form of a monarchy. So I just wanted to make that comment in passing to say that indeed it is important. This is why Amilcar Cabral talks about this importance in his book, The Weapon of Theory. He talks about this importance of understanding of struggle, both from a practical and a theoretical point of view. And I hope today to share some of the theoretical perspectives on the role of the youth and the relationship of the struggle that the youth engages in with power, that is, those who are in power. I consider Swaziland my country, Chair, because it is in Africa, and Africa is one. I will then use the words we most of the time to refer to your collective pain as my pain too, and to your collective struggle as young people of Swaziland as my struggle too, not only because I am an African, but also because I am still a youth. I don't know if I did indicate that to you, Chair, that I was still, a youth. So I'm going to use the word we more often. When I say we, I will also be referring to our struggle in Swaziland as our struggle in Africa. In talking about the role, Chair, of young people, I want to discuss with you three things. The first thing I want to discuss relates to the fact that the youth is and must always be at the center of challenging the ideas of the day. And the reason for that is quite simple, is that the youth is always going to is taking a baton from the old. And the baton must be given to the youth above ourselves as the youth that is still to come. And because the world is constantly changing, there can be no time in the history of humanity where the world is not changing. And if the world is changing, every generation, as Fanon said, must, out of its relative obscurity, determine its own mission, fulfill it or betray it. The consequence of that, Chair and Program Director, is that the youth always has a unique responsibility in history, precisely what the mission is in its own time. It is not now time for the mission of it is time the mission of young people, not of old people. Old people provide wisdom and experience, but young people provide energy. They provide the strength. They come into struggle with the advantage of health and time. And so I'm going to talk about why then it is important for the youth to always challenge the ideas of the day. But secondly, I am going to talk also about the struggles then in Swaziland and what these struggles in Swaziland actually mean, and needs to harness its energy from an ideological perspective. Because one of the roles of the youth is to articulate its ideas. Ideas, Ma-Africa, cannot be understood by the masses. They need intellectuals of the time. They need revolutionaries of the time to articulate them, to clarify them, to simplify them to the masses, and to explain them in the way that the masses themselves can understand. Let me start with, as I go on, I will try to weave in the some of the historical perspectives on Swaziland and some of the present problems and crises that are happening there to explain some of these theoretical points I will be talking about. That the youth is and must always be at the center of challenging the status quo. Why is it important to challenge ideas, Chair? It's important for the youth to challenge ideas to show that the youth is itself alive, and that the youth is itself thinking, and that the youth itself is concerned about its own future. Because to challenge the ideas of the status quo is to be concerned about the future of your own kids. It is to be concerned about the future of our own country, Swaziland, as it is about being concerned about the future of Africa as a whole. Part of the problems in Africa today have a lot to do with the fact that old people who are also very tired, some of them at least, are simply enjoying being in African parliaments and doing nothing and promising empty promises and eventually doing nothing and enjoying pensions at a later stage. So it is important for this reason, first of all, to challenge the ideas of the day. And so I've explained why it is important to challenge ideas. It's important to challenge them to show that we are alive, to challenge them to show that we are thinking, but to show that we care about the future, but also importantly, Chair, to show that we care about the past. Because you cannot challenge the ideas without knowing the past of those ideas and the present of those ideas. And you certainly cannot project the mission that Fanon was talking about into the future if you don't know the ideas that are governing or the ideas of the ruling elite of the day. Now that I've answered the question of why, the question that follows, Chair, is how must ideas be challenged then? You see, there is a custom, an old custom, that people who challenge ideas on the streets are uncivilized, that they are barbaric. This, comrades, is old. This propaganda is old. It is as old as human beings themselves. It is used by those in power to label those that challenge the status quo as people who are uncivilized and as people who are barbarists. And this is the exact same thing that the Europeans did to us. They said that we were barbaric, uncivilized, and we needed civilization. And part of that civilization was the use and the abuse of law. The putting of illegal laws and the putting of illegitimate laws, and the put has been the way in which we have always been called barbarists, uncivilized human beings. And therefore, this idea of challenging ideas by means of going to the streets, through strikes, through petitions, through protests, this way has always been criticized. But you have to note who criticizes these ideas, particularly because most of the people who are always going to be involved in these street protests and so on are going to be young people. Note who is going to come and oppose and speak ill and negatively of the way of struggling that we engage ourselves. It's always going to be those in power, right? What do they use? They use the media propaganda. They use the analysts, the political analysts of the day to protect the state, protect the ideas of the day, to protect an unchanging idea. No idea should never change, and therefore it's our responsibility to challenge them. And the way in which we challenge ideas must be orange ideas in a multi-frontal way, is to say that we must not only challenge, we must challenge them on them in organizational offices, we must challenge them internally within our own organizations, and we must challenge rotten ideas anywhere they may be found. And rotten ideas, comrades, my dear comrades, can be found anywhere. They can be found particularly in institutions of culture, in institutions of custom. And this is how monarchies around the world have survived over time. First, these monarchies were law unto themselves. Secondly, elsewhere in the world, these monarchies stopped being the laws unto themselves, as in the case of Britain, for example, and elsewhere in Africa. But what happened was that these monarchies continued to have this power of shaping culture and custom. I am not here making an argument against an argument, culture that is not changing, culture that is oppressive, culture that is malicious, and destroy the hopes and aspirations. This is the culture I talk about. Challenge this in a all sorts of mechanisms. Comrades, there's not one way to speak. There's not one way to oppose ideas or to advance ideas. There are many ways of advancing ideas. And when people tell us how to fight for freedom and liberation, when it is enemies that are telling us how to fight for liberation, we must never listen to them because they are always speaking in their own interest. Us into the table, always be vigilant because they hold the power. Power is not negotiated. Power is taken. Because whenever you negotiate power, and this is one of the catastrophes that happened in our own country. I now want to make I'm thinking here about the former president, the first founding president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, who actually gave political training to your political party in the late in the 60s. Nkrumah actually made a very important point about power when he said that the power away, they must be forced to give it away. They must be forced out of power. And so it is true in your case that your ideas are challenging power. The fact that political parties have been banned, basically technically since 1973, and the fact that they have been repressed, and the fact that only unions have had a semblance of being able to operate in Swaziland, but political parties themselves have been banned from actively engaging, let alone the fact that they have not been allowed the freedom of press to be able to express their own political ideas. Because if it must be assumed that characterized by the contestation of ideas, but those who are in power will always even stop people from engaging them, especially when our ideas are challenging the very idea of their power. So those who are in power will always respond in one of three ways. One of the ways in which they will respond is that they will always manipulate public opinion through the use of state media as its propaganda tool. And the youth has to understand this theoretical perspective. In this theoretical perspective, is the government that controls the media will use the media to drive its agenda all the time without exception anywhere in the world, including in your country. Another way for those that are in power is always to appeal to custom and culture. I've already made this point about appealing to custom and culture. Yeah, no, we are one people, we are one nation. So if we're one people and we're one nation with the same language, why are we oppressing each other? Well, you see, people are oppressing each other precisely because they've got interests. They've got interest to sustain, they've got interest to protect, they've got interest to defend. And so they appeal to custom and culture so that they can justify their exploitation. And this is a very important theoretical perspective for the young people to understand, because when young people are engaged in revolution, when they engage in revolution, they need to be able to articulate to the people, to the community, to the churches, to everyone and everywhere, to articulate to them how culture and custom is being used to silence them, to subordinate them, and to oppress them. And so this is very central, comrades, to be able to articulate as young people, because young people are always going to come in as a generation indeed of a Fanonian type to question the status quo. One of the things that you should constantly question is culture itself and custom. Culture that is scientific, is adaptive, is flexible, is changing. It is not static, remaining. It is not state culture that is trapped in the past, worthy of the name of culture. And any custom and must be fought that we have. The last way in which those use violence. And there is no doubt that in Swaziland violence has been used. It has not only been used in 2021, it has been used throughout time. And violence takes many forms. And this is another thing that we need to articulate to the people, that violence is not simply about people getting beaten. There is violence of emotional kind. There is what you call a psychological violence. And physical violence is always meant to make people fear to fight. So here, the leader of the PAC teaches us that we must never fear victimization. He says that the price of freedom is tears, blood, and death. And so he says that all those people who are willing, all those forces who are willing to gain freedom must be willing to pay the price of freedom. Now, young people, fortunately, are not bothered by death. Young people are not bothered by a bond in some bank, are not bothered by this big installment to pay. Young people have the right energy to engage in the struggle and to question things and to fearlessly do so. There's no struggle in the past that I remember where there were no young people. Even if you can go to Europe, the French Revolution itself was led by predominantly young people. If you go to the Russian Revolution, 1917, it was led by young people. You can go far back to North America. The so-called Revolution for Independence against the British in 1776 was led by predominantly young people, even though they had bourgeois interests, but they were young people. You can come here to South Africa, you see that these were young people. You can go to your own country. When you fought for independence in the 60s, these were young people. So my point is that young people are always at the center of the struggle, but they cannot succeed in that struggle unless they properly articulate, they properly clarify and explain to the masses of our people what the struggle is all about, and do so in a way that is understandable. If people cannot understand us, then they cannot follow what we do. If people don't know what we mean when we say we want democracy, then they cannot follow what we say. If people don't understand what we mean when we say we advocate for Pan-Africanism, then people cannot understand what we mean. For example, people are going to think that it's okay for land to be in the hands, when we know that historically it was not in the hands of administrators of the people to the people, because it certainly now takes ownership of the land, including the riches of that land. It is our responsibility to explain these things to the masses, that central to our struggle is that the land goes back to the people, not to a king. I need to be able to be clear on this. As long as the land remains in the powerful, controlling hands of a king or a government, then that land is not yet ours. For that land to be ours, it must belong properly, you see, to the people. Those who are in positions of power must simply do administration. That's our task. Our task is to be as clear to the people as possible. So the young people then, summarily, their task is to expose that certain ideas have expired. It is to therefore use their energy and to use their time advantage to fight these things. It is not the responsibility of young people to say things in a nice way. It is not the responsibility of young people who have got the energy to use a moderate language, to use an unclear, moderate, so-called civilized, language. What we must define as a civilized language is what helps us advance the struggle. That is civilized. And so the second role of the youth in the context of youth being itself capable of understanding the revolution is to mobilize, to organize. I want to make it clear here, Chair, Program Director, that there is a difference between mobilizing people and organizing them. And this difference is made clear by Kwame Ture, Michael Stokely, one of the Black leaders in America, which is us that we need to mobilize. And I say that the role of mobilizing cannot be a role of an 80-year-old or a 50-year-old. It is the role of a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 35-year-old, predominantly right up to 40-year-old, anyone who still has energy. Because the job of mobilizing is the job of energy, is the job that requires people to use their energy, to mobilize, to rally, to reunite oppressed forces. And the oppressed forces in Swaziland are quite clear. They belong to the working people who have been recently retrenched by the single most biggest industry that you have there. These are the people that have suffered retrenchment, that have suffered, as a consequence, unemployment. These are the youths that remain unemployed. These are the impoverished forces in Swaziland, people who live on roughly $2 a day. And if you talk about $2 a day, that's roughly, I can imagine that one can only buy a loaf of bread and a drink, and that would be it. And so these are the forces that need to be marshaled, to be mobilized. But these forces cannot only be mobilized by songs. These forces cannot only be mobilized merely for the sake of going and demanding democracy and merely for the sake of demanding multi-party democracy, even though this is very important. But they must be mobilized for something bigger. They must be mobilized into an organized force, because mobilized people are easily divided, distracted, and destroyed. But organized people always have a vanguard party. And I see your own organization as a vanguard. It must take on a vanguard role. And that vanguard role must always be that it articulates and expresses the aspirations and the interests of the masses. And this is realized, but it is also there to learn and articulate and learn skills of organizing. Because organizing communities is not very easy, it is tough. Because in the age in which we are, people simply are so ignorant. And they are ignorant because, one of the children of poverty is ignorance. When people are impoverished, they become desperate. And when they are desperate, they believe anything. And usually they also believe oppressive even to them, and they move this ignorance from the eyes of our people to organize. So to organize requires a couple of things. It requires education, political education. And I'm happy that we have this particular platform. But you have to accept one of the realities, and the realities that you are going to meet is that people don't want to be educated in politics. Most people actually hate politics. For one, I guess but you don't have to educate people in a political class on Zoom. Educated precisely at the, that is to say, as they are mobilized and fighting for democracy and the recognition of political parties, as they do those things on the streets, it is that opportunity. Because when people are mobilized, and I'm saying people at that point in time, comrades, are mobilized, they're not organized. So just because people are coming out from their homes and they're coming into the streets does not mean they are organized. It means they are mobilized. And when they are mobilized, there are chances that they are not yet organized. How do we know that people are organized? We know that people are organized when they themselves can articulate what the issues are, number one. Number two, we know that they are organized when it does not become difficult to mobilize them whenever we need to go on a protest, we need to go and close, we need to go and protest by the parliament, we need to go and do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and it does not become a hassle to organize them. And three, we know that people are organized when they are willing and when they are willing to pay the price. If people are not yet willing to pay the price, then they are not yet organized. That means they are still yet mobilized, and it means they are still hurt and they want problem solved, but they are not yet organized. And the ultimate role of this is to advance the revolution with its energy. And you know, when I looked at the past of Swaziland, it became evident to me that when you attained independence in 1968, precisely after that, this independence, which was when a king repealed this idea of independence and by banning political parties and by concentrating power on himself. And when the current king himself came into power in the 80s, he did the same thing. He maintained the status quo. And it's quite evident that there is a need for revolution in Swaziland. And that revolution, one of the aims of that revolution must precisely be to engage the idea of a king. What should be the idea of a king? What is an idea of a king in a society that wants to be socialist, in a society that wants to be a Pan-Africanist? What is the role? What should be the role of the king? Should be the role of the king to tell parliament what to do? Should it be to repeal laws at will, to do as it pleases, to ban political parties? What should it be? And so it's quite clear that the monarchy has been playing a reactionary role, comrades. And let's be clear about these things, because one of the things that are critical for revolutionaries is to speak the truth. You know, to speak the truth and to expose all lies that hide behind culture and custom. Expose them and expose them in the public. And it's difficult to educate people against culture and custom because it's deeply ingrained in themselves for the youth to articulate these issues to the general public. That even the Bill of Rights that seems to have been adopted in 2005 does not, it simply recognizes parties on paper, but in reality, these political parties have no space. And so, if an unelected person can pretty much dissolve parliament in one way or the other through the influence, whether it likes or doesn't. This is a big problem. That means that one man has veto, a veto over bills that Parliament wants to pass. This cannot be accepted. You see, it's no different from saying that, and I'm sorry to say, but it's no different from saying that your country and its people are a property of the king, and it should not be so. It should not be so. Otherwise, what you are left with is to become a DRC under King Leopold in the late 1900s. So otherwise that's what it means. And so our responsibility as young people is, we have to get doing that. I mean, if the king, even by historical standards of kings, when a king has about $100 million of wealth, are still impoverished. It can't be accepted. I've just indicated to you earlier on that, and I'm telling you things that that people live under $2 a day. And 8%, actually, close to 59% of the rural population, we are told by statisticians that they live below the national poverty line. That is to say, they live less than $2 a day. And 20% of those people are considered to be in extreme poverty. You see, so it's very evident that there is a huge income inequality gap. In fact, Swaziland is among the top 10 countries that are the most unequal societies in the world. It's typical of South Africa, which is also the most unequal country in the world, even despite having the so-called best constitution in the world. Because people, unfortunately, do not eat bad constitutions. See, people eat good constitutions, not bad constitutions. And so the point is, comrades, that the role is to sharpen the contradictions, to make these things clear to the public and to the masses. One of the things that Zephaniah Mutupeng taught us in the PAC was the importance of young people, and he was referring to students at the time. He was saying that the role of students, that is to say the role of the youth, is to speak the truth no matter the consequence. And I'm going to land here now because I don't want to belabor the points that I'm making here. But suffice to say that the role of the youth is to challenge the status quo. If you did not hear anything else I've said in this platform, at least you should remember that I've said the role of young people is to challenge the ideas of the day. The ideas of the day are narrow nationalistic, they are capitalistic, they are imperialistic, and they simply perpetuate a colonial structure of oppression of our people. And this goes on to show that even if a country has its own king, it does not mean that a country is free. For a country to be free, it must have itself as king. It cannot have a king. The king must be the people themselves, and the king must be a mere administrator. And so our responsibility is to fight. It is to struggle. And I want to congratulate your struggles that we've seen throughout the media in the previous year, where you were engaging on the streets as young people, deliberately demanding freedom and liberation, because you have seen through the eyes of the lie that there's no freedom, there's no liberation. As long as there's still serious inequality, no political rights, no freedom of press, as long as the powerful still can go and put an MP in jail, then that tells you that there is no freedom there, there's no liberation there. The goal should be to rally and to unite all the forces under the banner of African nationalism, under the banner of Pan-Africanism, to advance an Africanist socialist democratic order. And any democracy that is not socialistic is still bad democracy. This is why in this country we have democracy and we have poverty. at the same time. Poverty and democracy cannot coexist and should not coexist. And so I want to urge you on to continue with the fight. And not belabor the point beyond.
Thank you very much, DP. I think it was loud and clear that power cannot be given. Power is always taken by the oppressed. It was clear that the youth must define its own mission. It was very clear that the role of the youth is to contest ideas and to contest the status quo everywhere and shape the future. Comrades, now it's your time to ask questions. Let me open the floor. I don't want to call names. I just want you to come through. There are no questions. Was it that clear?
Yes, Comrade Chair.
It was clear, so the homework is in the doing.
Yes,
Go
Comrade
ahead.
Chair. I am clear, Comrade Chair.
Yes, you are very clear.
Yes, thank you so much to Comrade Lunga for such a great presentation. Our speaking points here. Beyinhle kakhulu presentation yakhe ne-analysis yakhe. Kukhona la ngishiyeke khona, Comrade Lunga. I was thinking mobilize and organize is the same thing. I heard you now say the mass, when you mobilize them, they can be easily divided. Then naga organized, so would say they are willing to participate, to pay the price for the struggle, to advocate issues. Yes. May you please deeply unpack for me that part? Somehow I understand, but there's this mentality that I was having. I think this is one that was wrong. I was thinking mobilize and organize the same thing.
Yeah. So I think it's a very important point that you raised. To mobilize is always about bringing people to one place. Usually mobilization is about an event. It's about an activity. It doesn't mean that people that are mobilized on the streets, for example, are organized, in the sense that, let me give you an example of Martin Luther King, and that's the example that Kwame Ture offered, which I think is very illustrative. When they were marching in the 1960s for civil liberties in the United States, he was able to marshal hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps 1 million people. And Martin Luther King was a good mobilizer, Ture would say. He was a good mobilizer, but not a good organizer. Because Martin Luther King brought people together and then he told them to go home. You know, if you read the speech, I Have a Dream, you should read that speech again. You will get the point I'm making. He says, go back to Alabama, to Mississippi, hoping that someday, somehow, things are going to be okay. Now, those people are an example of a mobilized people, but they were not organized. If they were organized, what would they have done if they were organized? If they were organized, they were not going to go back to Mississippi. They were not going to go back to Atlanta, to Georgia. They were going to remain exactly where they were and cause a national uprising, build a momentum on that uprising into a formidable resolution. Let me give you an example again of another mobilized people. During the fall of the Margaret dictatorships in 2011 onwards, and the fall of these leaders included, unfortunately, the fall of Gaddafi. In 2011, you will see in North Africa that most leaders that had led there for quite some time suddenly fell. Those people were mobilized and half organized in the sense that they were able to fight until the leader left the position of power. But unfortunately, those leaders were replaced by pretty much people who harbored, who supported the same ideas. And so even though these old leaders were overthrown, the situation was not better. Take the Libyan situation, for example. When people mobilized themselves, and literally they were mobilized by Europe, when they were mobilized by NATO, they were able to overthrow Gaddafi. But where is Libya now? So that's not being organized. If you are organized, you don't mobilize to cause chaos. When you are mobilized, and when you are organized in order to advance an ideological future, to advance a clearly defined, clearly understood goal. If your goal is merely to get rid of a leader, that's not being organized. You see, the reason we are an organization is precisely that our role is beyond mobilizing people. Organization involves conscious, deliberate, or intentional teaching of people to take the struggle into their own hands and not to leave the struggle in the hands of politicians. You see, so the fundamental difference between mobilize and organize is firstly, in theory, about the short-term nature of mobilization and the long-term nature of organization. So organization is always about long-term. Mobilization is about a quick win. We are students in a university. We don't want the fees to increase, but we don't necessarily want to overthrow the system. We're just mobilized for that idea. So the line may not always appear clear until mobilization fails. And usually mobilization fails, but organization is a relentless struggle. When people are organized, they struggle relentlessly. They do not stop until the goal is achieved. And everybody participates, owns the struggle, and is willing to pay the price. I'm not sure if that makes sense to you.
Thank you, DP.
We said, Comrade Lunga, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's clear now.
Right, thank you.
Any other question? DP, if you can just say the last word of closing before I give the chair to close finally for us.
Yes, Chair. I think I should again thank you very much for inviting me to this platform. It's always important to share ideas because we learn from each other, and we are also, I must say, learning from the struggles of Swaziland and the struggles of the people of Swaziland, and in particular the shining example of the involvement of young people. I had an opportunity to see some of the videos of the images of the enthusiasm and the energy of the young people who have been engaged in that struggle. And it's very humbling to see that young people are still able to keep the fires burning when most people seem to lose hope. Young people become that hope in the revolution. And I would like to cheer you on in the struggle that you engage in. Like I said earlier on, Eswatini is part of Africa. It is Africa. It is one. We are one people. We did not divide ourselves. We were divided by the enemy because the enemy wanted the cake that we had. And so we are one in a sense. And part of the reasons why we cannot solve our problem is that we continue to work in isolation, and we can't succeed in isolation. All the big countries in the world, go to China. China has got a population of 1.3 billion people. It's a single nation, almost speaks one language, Mandarin, almost everybody. You have United States with 350 million people in its population. These are states that are over 54, you see. And you have a European Union actually uniting itself right now, with over 27 countries forming the European Union. And the European Union had literally collapsed borders, Chair. They have no borders. But here, if I want to go to Swaziland, I must have what? I must now feel like I'm going to another country, whereas I'm going to my fellow African brothers and sisters. See, this cannot be. And so we're one nation. We have been divided by the enemy, and our struggle remains as one. The pain of the Swaziland people is our pain, and we feel the struggles that you are engaged in, and we had when you had there, comrades, and we would like to, like I was saying, to cheer you on. I mean, there is no reason whatsoever why we are 15 countries in SADC. We should be one country literally. There must be free movement, one passport, one currency, one army. That's what the Americans have. That's what the Europeans have. That's what the Chinese have. That's what Eastern Europe has. That's what the Indians have with their 1.4 billion people. What about Africa? So we have a long way to go, but we have a responsibility to build from the ground up. And I think Swaziland is a shining example of challenging status quo. And I think that contribution in the struggle is itself worthy of recognition. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, over to you in closing.
Thank you so much, National Chairperson, Comrade Gaba, and our guest, Comrade Lunga, for making this event possible for us to be here, to capacitate us, to make us view the importance of challenging ideas in our society as we advance the struggle. As the youth, we have seen no reason to stop the struggle for freedom, the struggle for socialism. It is true that the journey for freedom is not easy. I heard Comrade Lunga when he says the price for freedom is tears, blood, and death. Already, we are walking over blood. Already, our people have been massacred by the monarchy. Already, our people, as we speak now, freedom fighters are behind bars. It is not an easy thing to get freedom. It is so much challenging. Siyajabula kuva ukuthi ama-comrades atosinika i-solidarity, atosinika ithemba lokuthi comrades continue fighting. Our struggle, I heard Comrade Lunga say, the people must be the king themselves. Our struggle is the struggle for land. We are meeting a challenge about the current king we are having. In fact, it's not the king that is Mswati, Lolunenginga. It is the institution of the monarchy. That is the challenge. From the past, we were saying that Lenginga is Mswati. But as long as the struggle advances, that is where we see the would say Aksim Swati. The issue is the institution of the monarchy, because even those who are in the monarchy support him, and yes, they even go out to media. There is a point where you said those who are ruling are even using media propaganda to control the masses, to brainwash the masses, to fool the world, to fool even the world, because even the media we have locally, is being controlled by the royalty, because everything is being the royalty. The only media that is publishing fair everything is the Swaziland News. That is an online publication, and the media in the country is being controlled. Bebavela nabo labanye basho ukuthi border. Even the brother of King Mswati even said it. What political parties will never rule Eswatini. When the king give orders to Jeffrey Shabalala, the former army commander who killed people and confessed that he killed people, and he confessed that he drove people on fire in Matapa Pruwana, 14 people he drove on fire. He confessed that we drove people in an order, and he said the order was given by the king that kill the people. You see, it's a great challenge because he believes that everything belongs to him. That is why even if we can give him a meter to tomorrow and say he must address the people, he will speak the same thing and say everything in Swaziland belongs to me. And which is a great challenge to us when we are fighting, because our struggle is a struggle for land. We are saying the land must belong to the people. There is no man who have come with land here. Yeah. Without the land, there is no freedom. And that's the challenge we are facing. Now will be the dialogue. Even the SADC. SADC is being now, the chairperson of SADC is Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa. And what Cyril Ramaphosa did, ufikela kaNgwane, wasuka after bekunema elections in South Africa, weta la kaNgwane, wathi nafikela kaNgwane, the only person labonana naye is the same king that is oppressing the masses. Then bavumelana with the king, not the people, with the king bavumelana ngokuthi i-constitution ithi bantu abahambe bayesibayeni lesibayeni ngikuphi kule khaya lakhe eMswati leka lozitha lesigodlweni kuthiwa kasami sokhuluma indzaba tethu le khaya lakhe leka lozitha uyavuma naye Ramaphosa. When political parties, the opposing forces, engage Cyril Ramaphosa and say, no, we can't go there, it is dangerous, it is not working for the people. For even today, they are saying Cyril Ramaphosa have not replied to them. SADC is saying the people, they must go into the slaughterhouse where the king even insults us. But the same SADC is saying we must go to the same home. Then it gives us a great challenge. Whose interest is the SADC saving? Then it's very simple. When you say comrade Lunga, you say the 15 countries in SADC. We were supposed to be one. This thing would have never been happening. And it's a great challenge. It's a great challenge. Now the king ubute bantu lapha esibayeni utawuhamba yokhuluma nalamasotsha nalabangani bakhe because amaswati akasayi lapha. Awukhuluma namasotsha nabangani bakhe emva kwalokho batshele SADC ukuthi manje ke hayi sivumelene nemaswati. And now there is these upcoming elections. That is why the youth, there is a role that needs to be played by the youth in the struggle. Say, yeah. Bantu bakhala ngetinkundla election, the non-democratic tinkundla of the monarchy. But now they are planning it that the elections at tinkundla in 2023 next year, they must be successful. They are planning it even now. The prime minister that is appointed by the king, uthi ema elections at October. But the same people are saying no to tinkundla elections. We want political parties to participate. It is a great challenge. That we can say a lot of things that is happening. Comrades, thank you so much for solidarity, comrades. Even in future, comrades, we are hoping to see continue participating. We have seen our youth and the way they view things and the way they debate after the political schools. It's so interesting, and we see the impact of the political school. Thank you so much, comrades.
Thank you. I think the chair is